has pretty much embraced pseudoscience lately, especially in regards to feminism.
Okay, so
Pseudoscience in regards to feminism.
Someone who is popular on YouTube for being very educated as far as science goes is practicing pseudoscience. It's like you can go to Thunderfoot's channel and see real science. He'll do scientific experiments.
Thunderfoot is in fact a scientist.
Okay, so there we have the Drunken Peasants, notably a guy called Ben, I think, who is from the Bible Reloaded channel, apparently. Not a channel I'm very familiar with. Committing a classic logical fallacy of appealing to authority. And this is one of the biggest problems I have with pseudoscience. The idea that because someone's a scientist, they are somehow incapable of practicing pseudoscience. Rupert Sheldrake, who I mentioned in my last pseudoscience video, is precisely the textbook example of a scientist who does pseudoscience. Because Rupert Sheldrake is, or at least was once, a practicing proper scientist. He has peer-reviewed papers published, although he has not had anything peer-reviewed for I think about 20 years. That's because he decided to stop being a real scientist and start being a pseudoscientist. So, no, Thunderfoot being a scientist does not make him immune from pseudoscience. If you recall the recent Bill Nye Ken Ham debate, Ken Ham pulled out a list of scientists with proper science qualifications, not the trailer park qualifications Kent Hovind has, but actual qualifications from the mainstream of the scientific community. He pulled them out as what he presumably thought was some kind of trump card in favour of creationism, implying that creationism somehow has some kind of scientific validity. It doesn't. Thunderfoot is no different. If he makes scientific claims, he needs to back them up just as anyone else does. He can't just say, I'm a scientist, so therefore everything I say is scientifically valid.
This guy said he studies mathematics and economics, so how can he make the determination that it's pseudoscience? Like, what is the basis for it?
We make the determination as to what is and isn't pseudoscience by looking at what is and isn't peer-reviewed. We say, is this particular science accepted by the scientific community? If it's not, why isn't it? Why is it not past peer review? That's really all there is to it. I don't know why you think that someone with a degree in economics or mathematics is somehow immune from having an opinion about science, given there's no one on the Drunken Peasants, as far as I can gather, has any qualifications in any kind of subject. So it seems very odd to me that you're going to say this person isn't qualified in science, instead they're qualified in mathematics, therefore they're not qualified to decide what is and isn't pseudoscience, but here's a bunch of guys who have no qualifications in anything, somehow are qualified to say what is and isn't pseudoscience. People who work in, who have done degrees in things like mathematics or any kind of higher education subject, they understand how that whole process works, they understand how academia works, that's how they can spot whether something has or has not been through the academic process as to how it's presented. Is the study being presented, is it credited, is it peer reviewed, has it been discredited? In the case of a lot of the things Thunderfoot is using to try and back up his whole sexual dimorphism idea, he's using certain discredited studies.
STEM fields, they're all the same.
There's people out there, I mean, look, there's people out there with scientific degrees who are full of shit.
Of course.
So there we have Ben, who previously said Thunderfoot can't do pseudoscience because he's a scientist, is now completely accepting TJ's assertion that there are scientists out there who are full of shit. So he's just really gone from one way of thinking to the complete opposite way of thinking. Now TJ is actually correct here, there are scientists out there who are full of shit, which is what I mentioned at the beginning of this video. However, it's understanding why they are. Rupert Sheldrake, for example, is full of shit because the stuff he's trying to promote now cannot pass peer review. The stuff that made him a credible scientist did pass peer review. That's how we know that he is now practicing pseudoscience. The fact that he's a real scientist actually plays against him in this scenario, because we know not only is he not getting his stuff peer reviewed, we know he should know exactly why it's not passing peer review. So it's notable here as well that Ben who was appealing to the authority of Thunderfoot before, is now submitting to the authority of TJ, because TJ is now saying that the exact opposite of what Ben was trying to assert before, but because it's TJ, Ben is accepting it.
Thunderfoot is not one of them. You can't, I mean, you can disagree with what he says, but you can't, labeling it pseudoscience is ridiculous. I mean, pseudoscience is something like reflexology
Or
some
homeopathic
shit.
medicine, yeah.
You know, yeah, you know, you take this miracle cure and you'll be fine. You know, just we have the hidden cure for cancer.
Yeah.
No. Pseudoscience does not have to be anything like that. Pseudoscience just has to be anything that is presented as science that isn't science. Anything that's presented as being science but hasn't gone through the scientific method, if you like, hasn't been academically peer-reviewed. That's really all it has to be. That's all something has to be to qualify as pseudoscience. It doesn't have to be something glaringly obvious, like some kind of miracle cure or some kind of alternative medicine or reflexology or anything like that. Those things certainly do qualify as pseudoscience, but they are not the only kind of pseudoscience. What the Drunken Peasants are not doing here is presenting an actual criteria for how they would determine something to be pseudoscience. They're just listing a list of examples that they think that they determine to be pseudoscience and saying that's what pseudoscience is, not what Thunderfoot says. If Thunderfoot is presenting anything as science which is not, then he is practicing pseudoscience, immaterial of how obvious it may or may not be to you. What a lot of this makes me think about, and a conference report left quite a good comment on R and Ra's latest video, which summed up a lot of this, is we really need to start showing people how to recognise a proper authority from a false authority. How do we know who to listen to when we're talking about a certain subject, or when a certain subject is being discussed? Who do we listen to? Who do we dismiss? That's really something I think people need to start looking at. How do we recognise the correct authority? How do we know someone's authority is valid? To me, someone in a position of authority should be able to explain their points and explain their arguments in immense detail. What we should absolutely not be doing is accepting their arguments simply because they come from some position of authority. That's the exact opposite of what an authority should be able to do. An authority should be able to give us the best arguments, the most detailed arguments, the most references to the relevant academic literature, etc., etc., etc. Not just, look, I'm an authority on this, so shut up and listen.